The invisible name. It was a night like no other in New Delhi. The air buzzed with anticipation as the capital city readied itself for a gathering that would bring together the brightest minds and most powerful leaders from across the world. The government grounds were lit with golden lights, the roads freshly painted and security at its tightest. It wasn't just another gala. It was India's grand technology summit, a celebration of innovation and the country's meteoric rise in the digital era. All eyes were on the guest list, a closely guarded secret until the very last moment. CEOs, dignitaries, influencers, and politicians, each name read out loud was met with gasps, applause, or sometimes envy. But one name was missing. Far away, from the red carpets and the camera flashes, Sundar Pichai stood quietly in a narrow hallway of a modest hotel near Connaught Place. There was no fanfare, no paparazzi, and no security detail following his every move. He wasn't wearing a designer suit, just a simple shirt, a little wrinkled, and a pair of worn-out shoes that had traveled too many miles. Sundar had returned to India for something far more personal than any summit. He had promised his Amma that he would visit the temple she used to go to every Saturday morning, the one she always spoke of even during her last days in California. But she was gone now, and the promise had been left hanging like a silent prayer in the wind. He had arrived 2 days ago. No media had covered his landing. No ministers had sent greetings. It wasn't because they didn't know him. It was because no one expected him to show up unannounced and, more importantly, uninvited. Back at the venue, Modi ji was shaking hands with foreign delegates and addressing a crowd that hung on his every word. The ceremony was about progress, technology, and the future. The air was filled with digital dreams. Yet for someone like Sundar, who had built one of the most powerful tech empires in the world, there was no seat reserved. There was no invitation in his inbox, no warm, "We're looking forward to seeing you" from the government. And yet, Sundar didn't seem hurt. Not on the outside. He sat in the lobby of the hotel with a small notebook on his lap. He was writing something. Not emails or reports, just thoughts, memories, lines his mother had once whispered during bedtime. Humility is when you know you can move mountains, but choose to plant trees instead. He had lived by that line, even in boardrooms, filled with ego and ambition. The front desk manager walked over. She was a young woman in her 20s, tired eyes behind thick glasses, but kind in her tone. "Sir, someone called for you. They didn't leave a name." Sundar smiled softly and nodded. No surprise. Very few people knew he was here, and even fewer cared. But there was one person who did. Outside the hotel, a boy of about 12 sat on the pavement trying to fix a second-hand laptop he had found in a garbage bin. The screen flickered on and off. He had been watching YouTube tutorials in Hindi, trying to understand how to fix the motherboard. Sundar saw him earlier that day, determined and focused, unaware that the man watching him had once been a boy not too different from himself. Quiet, curious, and invisible. As the sun began to set, Sundar left his room and walked toward the temple. It was a short walk, but he took his time. The roads were crowded, full of honking cars and shouting vendors. Somewhere in that chaos, he found comfort. The kind of comfort that reminded him of his Chennai childhood, how his father, an electrical engineer, would explain how transistors worked using matchsticks and broken wires. When he reached the temple, it was quiet. There were no bells ringing, no priests chanting, just the silence of evening prayers echoing through stone walls. Sundar took off his shoes, walked in, and sat cross-legged near a corner. He closed his eyes. There were no security guards, no advisors whispering in his ears. For the first time in months, he could breathe. He wasn't thinking about Silicon Valley or quarterly earnings. He was thinking about his mother. How she used to place a small marigold garland on the statue's feet. How she smiled even when she was in pain. How she believed in people even when they didn't believe in her. Suddenly, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned around slowly. It was the boy from earlier, the one with the broken laptop. The boy looked nervous, but determined. "Sir, I saw you at the hotel. I think I know who you are." Sundar didn't reply. He just smiled. The boy pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was a hand-drawn diagram of a circuit, with messy handwriting and uneven lines. Can you help me fix it? My father says I should stop wasting time, but I think I can build something. Sundar looked at the diagram. It wasn't perfect, but it had heart. It had the kind of stubborn innocence he used to carry in his school bag. He took the paper, studied it for a moment, then nodded. Yes, he said softly. Let's fix it together. Back at the summit, reporters were still debating the same question. Why wasn't Sundar Pichai on the guest list? None of them knew he was sitting under a tree beside a temple, helping a young boy fix a forgotten machine. None of them saw the light in that child's eyes when the screen blinked on. None of them heard the boy whisper, "One day I'll build something big." And none of them would believe what that boy would grow up to become. But that's a story for another part. For now, as Sundar placed his hand gently on the boy's shoulder and handed him the working laptop, there was only one thing that mattered. The quiet power of being present, even when you're overlooked. And somewhere deep in the shadows of power and politics, a small ripple had begun, a ripple that would soon become a wave. The boy, the code, and the storm, the next morning broke with a soft drizzle over Delhi. It wasn't heavy rain, just enough to make the air smell like wet earth and fresh beginnings. Sundar Pichai stood on the hotel balcony watching the sleepy city come to life. Vendors pushing carts, children in uniform dragging backpacks too heavy for their shoulders, and the distant sound of honking that never truly disappeared. For him, these were not just sounds. They were memories stitched together from a life that had started in a tiny two-room apartment in Chennai, where every window was a door to a dream too big for the walls around it. His phone lay untouched on the side table. Dozens of missed calls, messages from California, a few from his assistant in Singapore. But Sundar didn't pick it up. Not yet. He wasn't ready to return to that world. Not when something small but important had taken root the night before. The boy with the broken laptop, his name was Amir, 12 years old. Mother worked in a garment factory. Father sold spare parts on the sidewalk. They lived in a single rented room in Paharganj, just a 20-minute walk from the temple. And yet, inside that small body, lived a mind that had already begun to see patterns where others saw only problems. Amir had found the old laptop in a scrap heap 3 months ago. He'd been tinkering with it, using borrowed tools and YouTube videos to try to get it working. The night before, with Sundar's help, the screen had flickered to life, and with it, Amir's hope. Sundar had promised he'd come back the next day. And he meant it. He left the hotel quietly, wearing the same clothes from yesterday, and walked to the chai stall where he'd asked Amir to meet him. He waited only a few minutes before the boy appeared, holding the laptop like it was treasure, a shy smile spreading across his face. "Sir, I tried what you said. It boots up now. And I wrote something." Sundar raised an eyebrow. "You wrote something?" Amir nodded, pulling out a paper. On it were lines of handwritten code, simple Python, shaky syntax, but the logic was surprisingly clear. It was a calculator app, the kind most people would ignore. But the way he structured the conditions showed he understood the thinking behind it, not just copying from tutorials. Actual thinking. "You figured this out yourself?" Sundar asked, genuinely impressed. "I watched videos. But then I started changing things. I didn't want to just copy. I wanted to understand." Sundar felt a strange weight in his chest. It wasn't pride exactly. It was something deeper. Recognition. This boy had no privilege, no access, no mentors. But he had hunger. The same hunger Sundar had once felt sitting on the floor of his Chennai home, listening to cricket scores on a borrowed radio, and wondering how a piece of metal could bring voices from far away. Sundar asked Amir if he'd like to meet someone. Not a CEO, not a politician, just someone who ran a small coding club for underprivileged kids in East Delhi. It wasn't fancy, just 6 computers and a lot of passion. Amir's eyes lit up. He'd never been to a computer class before. They boarded a crowded metro train. No VIP treatment, No security. Just two people in the crowd talking about logic gates and variables, while the city rushed past outside the windows. In the club, Sundar introduced Amir to Kavita, the club's founder, a woman in her 40s who had once been a software engineer before leaving the corporate world to teach street children. Amir hesitated at first. He wasn't used to air conditioning, clean chairs, or strangers asking about his dreams. But then he sat at one of the computers. His fingers moved slowly at first, then faster. Sundar watched silently, arms crossed. He didn't interrupt, didn't lecture. He just observed, and then something unexpected happened. One of the kids in the room recognized Sundar. He'd seen him on a YouTube video, whispered to another. Within minutes, the room was buzzing, not with noise, but with quiet wonder. They knew who he was now. Sundar smiled and placed a finger on his lips. A silent request. Don't make this about me. Make it about you. And they did. They began to ask questions, not about Silicon Valley, but about errors in their code, about how to make a game jump higher, about why one line worked and another didn't. And Sundar answered each with patience, breaking down concepts in the same way his own professors had done for him decades ago. His voice never rose. His tone never changed. He didn't try to impress. He just helped. Meanwhile, back at the summit, whispers had begun. A journalist had caught wind of Sundar's presence in the city. The story was spreading quietly. He's here, but he's not attending. No photos. No press. And people started asking questions. Why was he not invited? Did he refuse? Did he feel slighted? But the truth was far more powerful than the politics they imagined. After hours at the coding club, Sundar and Amir walked back through the narrow lanes of Delhi. It had begun to rain again, this time heavier. They took shelter under a shop's awning, laughing as the streets flooded ankle-deep. "Sir," Amir said after a long silence, "do you think I could ever build something people use? Something that changes lives?" Sundar looked at him, then down at his own shoes soaked and muddy. "You already have," he said quietly. "You changed mine." The words hung in the air, soft and strong. And then from across the street, a man began, shouting, not at them, at someone running. A thief had snatched a woman's purse and was sprinting through the rain. Instinctively, Amir dashed into the street to stop him, nearly slipping in the water. Sundar shouted after him, heart racing, but the boy was fast, fearless. The thief shoved him to the ground and kept running, but not before Sundar saw a glint of something in the thief's hand, a small badge, one that looked oddly official. Something didn't feel right. As Sundar helped Amir back to his feet, his eyes stayed locked on the figure disappearing into the crowd. The woman whose purse was stolen stood frozen. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even surprised. "It happens a lot around here," she said softly. "But thank you. Your boy is brave." Sundar didn't respond. Not yet. Something in his gut whispered this was more than a street robbery. The badge, the way the woman spoke, too calm, too rehearsed. And that was when Sundar realized. Someone was watching, not just that moment. The whole day, and maybe even longer. He turned slowly, scanning the crowd. Faces blurred in the rain. But one figure lingered. A man with an umbrella, standing perfectly still across the road. He made no move to hide. He simply stared. And then he turned and walked away. A chill crept into Sundar's spine. Because suddenly, this trip, this visit to keep a promise, to help a boy, to find peace, felt like it was about to change into something much bigger. Something he didn't see coming. The silent observer, the city never truly sleeps. But that night, Delhi felt unusually still. The rain had quieted down to a whisper, leaving behind puddles that reflected streetlights like shattered mirrors. Sundar Pichai stood by the window of his hotel room, unmoving. The boy, Amir, had gone home safely after the incident, his tiny, frame soaked from head to toe but still grinning as if the day had given him a memory he would never forget. Yet Sundar's mind was not at peace. The moment replayed itself again and again. The woman, the thief, the badge, and most of all, the man with the umbrella who didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. He knew that kind of stillness. It wasn't ordinary. It was the kind that belonged to people trained not to be seen until they chose to be. Sundar wasn't a spy or a politician or someone used to conspiracy. But he had spent enough time at high levels of power to understand one truth. Sometimes when you step off the expected path, people start watching, especially when your silence speaks louder than their headlines. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, as the sun broke through the fading clouds, he left the hotel early and walked toward Paharganj. He didn't take his usual route. He zigzagged through unfamiliar alleys, pausing at corners, checking behind him. Nothing obvious. Just the ordinary chaos of morning. Still, the feeling stayed with him, a gentle pressure at the base of his spine like a thread pulling him back. When he reached Amir's building, he stopped. The boy was waiting outside with his backpack. He wore the same shirt as yesterday, washed and still damp, but he carried himself with excitement. "I have an idea," he said before Sundar could speak. "A big one." They walked together down the road as Amir began explaining it. He wanted to build a small app, a voice assistant, in Hindi for school kids who couldn't read well. He had noticed that many children at the coding club had trouble understanding written instructions, but when they heard something spoken in their own language, their faces lit up. "I want it to be like a friend," Amir said. "Not just give answers. Talk to them." Sundar felt something tighten in his chest. He remembered how hard it had been for him growing up to access information in English. The first time he read a user manual, he had to translate every word by hand, line by line. And here was this boy trying to build something so others wouldn't have to struggle the way he did. They spent the day working at the coding club again. Kavita gave them the corner table. Amir typed while Sundar guided him, offering small suggestions, pointing out logic gaps, but never taking over. He wasn't there to lead. He was there to listen. As they built, more children gathered. One by one, they sat around them, watching. Not because Sundar was famous, but because something real was happening. Something they could feel. A spark, an invitation. By evening, they had a simple prototype. It wasn't polished. It couldn't pronounce every word correctly. But it worked. When one of the younger girls typed in a question about subtraction, the app spoke back in a clear, warm voice in Hindi. She laughed. Actually laughed. Not because of the answer, but because for once the machine spoke her language. Amir looked at Sundar, eyes wide. "We can keep improving it. We can—" Before he could finish, Kavita walked over. Her face had changed. The warmth had dimmed. She placed a gentle hand on Sundar's shoulder and asked him to step outside with her. They moved to the alley behind the center. She looked around once, lowered her voice, and said, "Someone was asking about you. A man in a black car came earlier. Didn't give his name. Just said he needed to know who you've been talking to. I didn't tell him anything. But, Sundar, are you in some kind of trouble?" Sundar stayed silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "What kind of car?" "Black SUV. Tinted windows. Government plates." Sundar nodded slowly. He wasn't surprised. Not anymore. But it made things more real. "Thank you for telling me," he said softly. "Don't worry, just be careful." He didn't want to scare her. He didn't want to scare anyone. But the unease had become too solid now to ignore. Someone was watching. And not for curiosity. For control. As he walked back inside, he looked at the children again, heads bent over keyboards, fingers clumsily typing dreams into code. They had no idea of the games played in the halls of power. They just wanted to build, to learn, to be seen, and maybe that was exactly what made them dangerous. Back at the hotel, Sundar received a message on his phone. It was short. "Your presence has been noted. We recommend you leave Delhi quietly. No name, no sender. Just that." He sat down, exhaled, and looked out the window. He knew what was happening. Not because someone had told him, but because he had seen it before. When ideas begin to take root in places not controlled by institutions, when a child from a forgotten corner dares to imagine building something meaningful, the systems that thrive on gatekeeping begin to shake. Sundar had built his career solving problems through logic, through strategy. But this wasn't Silicon Valley. This wasn't a conference room with whiteboards and pie charts. This was the heart of a country in conflict with its own future, between power and potential, between image and impact. He closed his laptop and picked up the notebook where he had written his mother's words. Plant trees. That night, Sundar made a decision. He would stay. He would help Amir finish the project. He would present it, not to a board of directors, not to investors, but to children, to parents, to teachers. He would show that something beautiful could grow outside the spotlight, and if people were watching, let them watch. But just as he turned off the lights to sleep, his phone vibrated again. This time, it was a photo. Blurry, taken from behind, but clear enough it was him and Amir, walking down the road. Caption: "You've made your move, now we make ours." Sundar stared at the screen, his heart thudding. Because the message was no longer just about him. It was about the boy. And that changed everything. Shadows at the edge of light. By the next morning, the air in Delhi had changed again. The sky was heavy, not with rain this time, but with a kind of invisible tension that clung to the skin. The streets moved as they always did. Cows weaving through traffic, chai stalls boiling with early gossip, rickshaws honking their daily rhythms. But Sundar felt it. Something had shifted. Something was watching. The photo on his phone from the night before haunted him. He had shown it to no one. Not to Amir, not to Kavita, not even to his assistant overseas. There was no benefit in spreading panic. But it had confirmed one truth he couldn't ignore anymore. This wasn't just curiosity. This was control, pressure, maybe even a warning. He stepped out of the hotel before dawn, avoiding the usual route. Instead of the main road, he took a longer path through back alleys, past closed shops and sleeping dogs. He needed to think, to breathe, and to protect the one thing that had become more important than anything else: Amir. When he reached the small building in Paharganj, the boy was already waiting, this time not outside but by the stairs. His eyes were sharper. He noticed the change too. Sundar could see it. Kids have a way of sensing danger, even when adults try to hide it. "Sir," Amir said quietly, "someone was asking my mother questions last night. They said they were from a school, but we don't go to any school." Sundar crouched beside him. "What did they ask?" "About you. If you were my teacher, if you had given me any foreign money." Foreign money. The phrase stung like a slap. So that's how they were painting it. He wasn't just a visitor now. He was an outsider, a threat. It didn't matter that he was born here. It didn't matter that he spoke Tamil, Hindi, and English with equal ease. When power feels threatened, it draws lines, and Sundar had stepped across one. They didn't go to the coding club that day. Instead, Sundar called Kavita and told her to pause all activities for the next 2 days. He didn't give reasons, just a quiet request. She understood. She had lived long enough in India to know that sometimes the safest move is to disappear, just for a little while. Sundar and Amir found a quiet tea shop on the edge of town. Dusty benches, flies buzzing near sugar jars. A small transistor, radio humming old Kishore Kumar songs in the background. There, over 2 glasses of cutting chai, they continued working. They didn't need internet. Amir had brought the code on a pen drive, and Sundar had his old laptop with local dev tools installed. They didn't talk about the men. They didn't talk about the message. Instead, they talked about bugs, errors, and what Amir wanted the assistant to say when it welcomed students. "It should say, 'You matter,'" the boy said. Sundar paused. "Why that?" Amir shrugged. "Because most of us never hear it." The words hit Sundar like a punch to the chest. He remembered growing up, his father barely speaking a sentence unless it had a purpose. His teachers treating the shy, soft-spoken boy as invisible unless he scored a perfect mark. His first years at Stanford, where he walked through rooms filled with noise and ambition, but often felt like a ghost. You matter. 3 syllables. But they carried the weight of a life. As the hours passed, the app began to take shape. They recorded voice samples, refined the logic, and rewrote sections that were too clunky. And with every step, Sundar saw something changing in Amir. Not just his code, but his confidence. The way he sat straighter. The way he asked deeper questions. He was no longer building an app. He was building a voice. But somewhere else in the city. Other voices were rising too. At the technology summit, now entering its final day, government officials buzzed with rumors. Journalists asked louder questions. And behind closed doors, someone handed a folder to a minister. Inside were photos, transcripts, summaries. Subject: Sundar Pichai activity. Unsanctioned outreach concerns. Influence. Independent education efforts. Undocumented support. The file didn't mention anything illegal. Because there wasn't anything illegal. But the language was crafted with precision. Enough to raise suspicion. Enough to spark the kind of whisper campaign that can kill a reputation before a single question is answered. Back at the tea shop, Sundar received a second message. Leave by morning, this is your final reminder, still no name, still no number. Amir leaned over and read the screen. They don't want you here, he said. Not with fear, just quiet clarity. Sundar nodded. Maybe not, but maybe we're here anyway. Amir looked down. Will they stop us? Sundar smiled faintly. They can try, but they can't stop the idea. That night, Sundar made another decision. He would go public, not through the news, not through a press conference, through the children. He reached out to a small community center run by an old friend near Kalkaji. It wasn't well known, but it had a projector, Wi-Fi, and more importantly, trust. He asked them to invite 20 local children and a few parents. No names, no press. Just a quiet presentation. The next afternoon, as the city turned its attention to the Prime Minister's closing speech at the summit, Sundar and Amir stood in front of a white wall in a small room filled with plastic chairs and barefoot kids. Amir spoke first. He didn't introduce Sundar. He didn't talk about Google. He talked about the app, about why he built it, about how his little sister, who couldn't read well, could now ask a question in her voice and get an answer she could understand. And then he said the words that would later be quoted in circles far beyond that room. This app doesn't care where you're from. It doesn't care if you have a uniform. It just listens. The room was silent. And then, Sundar played the app. The assistant's voice filled the room. Namaste. Aap maine rakhte hain. You matter. A few parents wiped their eyes. Some of the children clapped. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. After the session ended, a woman in a simple sari walked up to Sundar. Her voice trembled slightly. Sir, why are you helping children like mine? What do you get from this? Sundar didn't answer right away. Then he smiled. Because someone once helped me, and I never got to say thank you. He looked at Amir. But maybe this is how I say it. That night, as they walked back to the hotel, the streets felt different again, lighter. But then, just before they turned the corner, a black SUV pulled up beside them. The window rolled down. A man in a crisp white kurta leaned forward. No badge, no smile. Just a voice as cold as the wind behind him. We gave you every chance to leave quietly, Pichai. Now, you've made us act. Before Sundar could speak, the car door opened. 2 men stepped out, and Amir took a step back. But Sundar didn't move. He looked the man in the eye. If this is about fear, he said calmly, then you're already too late. The idea is already out there. The man smiled. Not kindly. But the boy isn't. And with that he nodded. The 2 men reached forward. Amir screamed. The price of one voice. The scream shattered the night. Amir's voice, sharp and frightened, pierced through the air like a stone through glass. The street around them. Moments. Ego humming with quiet traffic and murmured conversations, fell into a sudden and unnatural silence. The 2 men lunged forward, Not like kidnappers in movies, but like professionals. Calm, calculated, controlled. One reached for the boy, the other blocked Sundar's path, but they didn't count on one thing. Sundar Pichai didn't freeze. Without shouting, without panic, he moved toward Ayamir and did something no one expected. He placed himself directly between the boy and the men. Not aggressively, not violently, just there, unmoving, unyielding. The taller of the two agents, face unreadable, hesitated. A beat too long. It was just enough. A rickshaw slowed. A shop owner peeked out from behind his shutter. A street dog began barking. Eyes turned. This was Delhi, after all. Nothing stays hidden for long. "You're making this worse," the man in the white kurta said from the car, his voice laced with frustration now. "We gave you time. We gave you silence. And still you pushed." Sundar looked at him, his breathing steady despite the surge of adrenaline running through him. "He's a child," Sundar said, "building something good. And you're treating him like a threat. Why?" The man's expression didn't change, but his silence said more than any words could, because the answer was clear. They weren't afraid of what Ayamir had built. They were afraid of what it represented. An idea that didn't come from the top. A voice not shaped by power, but by purpose. Amir stood behind Sundar, fists clenched, trembling. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. Someone was trying to take away what little power he had found, and for the first time in his life, someone was standing in front of him, refusing to let it happen. A small crowd had started to gather now. Not large, but enough to make the agents uneasy. Phones were coming out. Someone was already recording. Sundar saw it from the corner of his eye. He stepped back slowly and pulled Amir behind him. The men looked at the kurta-clad figure in the car, waiting for the signal, but it never came. After a long pause, the man finally spoke. "This isn't over." Then the door shut. The SUV rolled away, melting into the Delhi traffic like a shadow slipping into darkness. And just like that, it was over. But the damage had been done. Amir didn't speak for the rest of the walk. Sundar didn't push him. He knew the boy needed space. Silence was sometimes the only shield people had when their world shook too hard. Back at the hotel, Sundar placed Ayamir on the bed and handed him a glass of water. His hands were still shaking, not from fear anymore, but from something deeper, something more dangerous. Rage. "I just wanted to help." Amir whispered finally, "Why do they hate that?" Sundar sat beside him. "They don't hate what you built," he said gently. "They fear what it means. When you speak, when you build, when you share, they lose control. And some people only know how to lead when they're holding the leash." Amir looked at him. His eyes were older now, not in age but in awareness. Something had been taken from him that night. Innocence, maybe. Or the quiet belief that good things would be left alone. But Sundar saw something else too, resolve. The next morning, Sundar called someone he hadn't spoken to in over 5 years. Her name was Reena Thakur, a journalist turned social media strategist who once ran campaigns for major tech foundations. Now she ran her own independent media, collective, small, fast, and fearless. "I need to tell a story," Sundar said, "but not mine." 2 hours later, Reena arrived at the hotel. No entourage, just a laptop and a pair of tired but intelligent eyes. She listened as Sundar and Amir shared everything, from the broken laptop to the app, the community center to the threats. She didn't ask dramatic questions. She just said, "Let's show the world what they tried to bury." What followed was a blur of movement. Reena's team worked with quiet precision. They recorded Amir's story, raw, unedited, and entirely in his own words. They captured Sundar talking not about Google, but about growing up with little more than ambition and borrowed books, and they ended with the app itself showing a small girl in a slum asking it, in broken Hindi, how to count to 20. The app responded, soft, clear, patient. Ek do, teen. And then the video cut to black. Just words on the screen. This is not politics. This is potential. Don't silence it. Share it. Reena's team uploaded the video anonymously. They didn't use Sundar's name. They didn't tag ministries or media houses. They let the people decide. Within hours, it exploded. Shared on WhatsApp groups, posted in Telegram forums, re-uploaded to YouTube by strangers who translated it into Tamil, Bengali, Marathi. Memes, hashtags, even parody accounts. But beneath the noise, something rare was happening. People were listening. Not just to Amir, but to every unseen child who ever asked a question and was told to stay quiet. Within 24 hours, a hashtag began trending. You matter. The same words Amir had programmed into his assistant, but now they were everywhere. Graffiti in Mumbai, chalk drawings in Chennai, stickers on auto rickshaws in Patna. Even school children in Srinagar began recording their voices and sharing questions they wanted to ask the app. The movement had gone beyond Sundar, beyond Amir. It had become something no minister, no official, no anonymous threat could control. And then something unexpected happened. An advisor from the Prime Minister's office called Sundar. Not to threaten, to invite. There's been a change. The voice on the line said, Modi ji would like to meet you tomorrow, not public, private. Sundar didn't respond right away. Amir sat beside him, watching. Finally, Sundar asked, Can I bring the boy? A long silence followed. Then the voice replied, Yes. Both of you. As the line disconnected, Sundar sat back in the chair, processing the moment. Not because it was a victory, but because it was proof. They had tried to silence a spark, and now they were reaching out to the fire. The next morning would be unlike any he'd lived before. But for now, he looked at Amir and said quietly, Tomorrow, we speak truth to power. Together. And Amir nodded, eyes steady. Heart strong. No longer just a boy with a broken laptop, but a voice the world could no longer ignore. The room where no one clapped, the morning was clear. No rain, no tension in the air. But Sundar Pichai knew what this day meant. He stood by the mirror in the small hotel room, buttoning the same simple shirt he had worn earlier that week. No suit, no tie. Not because he didn't have them, but because the moment didn't require symbols. It required truth. Amir sat on the bed behind him, dressed in his best clothes, an oversized shirt tucked into loose pants, his hair combed down too flat. His eyes flicked between excitement and fear. He held a small notebook in his lap, the pages filled with notes, ideas, half-coded algorithms, and a drawing of a sun with the words "You matter" written beneath it. You ready? Sundar asked gently, turning toward him. Amir nodded, but his voice was quiet. What if they don't listen? Sundar gave a soft smile. Then we make sure they hear. They left without fanfare. No press. No headlines. A white car came to pick them up, discreet and unmarked. The driver didn't speak. He simply nodded and opened the door. The drive was quiet, save for the occasional honk of traffic and the distant hum of the city waking up. As they neared the Prime Minister's residence, the roads grew emptier. Security thickened. Soldiers at corners. Barricades rolled back. Silence layered itself between the trees and the stones. It felt like a place where history waited to be written, or ignored. They were led through a side entrance. No red carpets. Just gray stone walls and wide corridors. Finally, they were asked to wait in a room with soft lighting and a single table in the center. On the wall hung a painting of Mahatma Gandhi, his face serene, eyes full of the kind of stubborn patience that defies centuries. After 10 minutes, a door opened, and in walked Prime Minister Narendra Modi. No cameras, no speeches, no handshakes, performed for public eyes. He entered with the quiet of someone who had already decided what kind of moment this would be. Sundar stood, so did Amir. Modi raised his hand slightly in greeting, then sat. I've heard the boy is gifted, he said calmly, eyes on Amir. And that you've been, busy. Sundar didn't respond with flattery, didn't perform respect. Instead, he nodded once. The boy is gifted, he replied. And brave. The Prime Minister looked at Amir now. Really looked. not as a politician surveying a voter, but as a man trying to understand what had caused so much unrest from something so small. Tell me, Modi said, what is this project of yours? Amir glanced at Sundar, then stepped forward. He opened his notebook, hands trembling slightly. But when he began to speak, his voice didn't shake. He talked about the app, the assistant, the children at Tuol, the coding club, the voices that were finally being heard. He didn't use fancy words. He didn't try to sound older. He just told the truth. We built it so kids could learn without being afraid of being wrong, he said. We made it speak like them, think like them, because no one else is building for us. The room was quiet. Modi listened, fingers gently, tapping the table. Then he said something unexpected. And what do you want? Amir paused. It wasn't a question he was prepared for. He looked at Sundar, then back at the Prime Minister, and he answered with a kind of honesty that only children are capable of. I want to keep building. Modi nodded slowly. And you? He asked. Sundar. What are you doing here, Mr. Pichai? You weren't on the guest list, you weren't invited, yet somehow you've managed to create more noise than anyone inside the summit. Sundar took a breath, then spoke. Not with anger, but with weight. I didn't come to speak at your stage, he said. I came to listen, and when I did, I heard something more important than any keynote. I heard a boy ask questions no one else was answering. And I remembered that progress isn't made by being seen. It's made by seeing others. Modi didn't interrupt. He let the silence stretch, and then he leaned forward slightly. Do you understand what you've done? He asked. You've made this political. Not intentionally, perhaps, but when ideas travel faster than protocol, people in power feel cornered. Sundar met his gaze. Good, he said quietly. Maybe it's time power learned to move. There was a long pause, and then Modi did something no one in that room expected. He stood up, walked to the window, and spoke without turning around. The world is changing, and we are not always ready for that change. But sometimes, the change walks through our door with a boy who refuses to stay silent. He turned back, looked at both of them. You will not be stopped. Not by us, not by anyone. Then, almost, as an afterthought, he added, but you must understand the system you shook will try to repair itself. It will resist, push back, protect its own. Sundar nodded. We're not trying to break it, just widen it. And with that, the meeting ended. No photos, no promises, just a quiet ending to a loud journey, but it wasn't the end. That evening, Sundar and Amir returned to the coding club. Children rushed toward them like heroes had returned from battle. Kavita wept quietly in the corner, her hands covering her mouth. They projected the final version of the app on the wall, and Amir pressed play. Namaste. Aap maine rakhte hain. Chaliye seekhte hain. Hello, you matter. Let's learn together. The children clapped, and Sundar stood at the back, eyes shining. No spotlight, no trophy, no applause meant for him, but he had never felt prouder. And far away in quiet offices and darkened halls, the people who had once tried to silence a child now sat watching a screen, one where a boy's voice had become louder than all their threats. They hadn't lost power. They had witnessed something stronger. Hope, simple, stubborn, and impossible to stop.